Hi, I'm Lou Pulsfer, and I'm here to talk for a while about the design philosophy, design notes, if you will, about my game Crashing Suns that's on the pre-order system at Worthington Publishing. Around about 1980, I had published what I think was my first game called Swords and Wizardry. It was a extension change from Stratego. Now, in Britain, Stratego never took off because its parent game, L'Attaque, which is originally French, had been published in England as well in 1909. And several other games derived from that game had been published, all by H.P. Gibsons, who ultimately published my game, Britannia, as well as Swords and Wizardry. And those games were still in print in the late 70s. I don't believe they are anymore. Well, I changed the system quite a bit. It was not strictly hierarchical. There was sort of an RPS involved there. And there was even a dice roll involved with the casting of spells. Obviously, with a name like Swords and Wizardry, it was a fantasy game. But it still retained the slow movement of Stratego and the crowded board. Now, this is quite a long story here because Crashing Suns, the game that's available now, is not like Stratego at all, except in one respect. But I'm willing to go through this to tell you about my thinking. Not too long after Swords and Wizardry was published, I designed a game called Doomstar, which was a space war game, vaguely reminiscent of Stratego in the sense that yes, you had pieces that were hidden in their identity, and there was hierarchical strength. However, two pieces could move at once if they were fighters, and they could combine their strength. Also, the board was much, much larger, so that there was lots of room for maneuver. And those fighters could move great distances. Also, there are black holes in the middle that can let you change direction as you're moving. Now, this game ultimately, many years after the fact, was published as a video game and is available on Steam. It was published in 2016, called Lou Pulsfer's Doomstar. I didn't put the Lou Pulsfer in there, the publisher, Large Visible Machine, did. Well, then a long time passed. For 20 years, I wasn't working on games at all. And sometime after I went back into designing games, I designed a World War II naval air game that used some of the same principles in the Pacific War. It's called Pacific Convoy, and it's supposed to be published at some point by Worthington. Again, it's vaguely Stratego-like, but retains the hierarchical stuff that a 6 beats a 5. The 6 is, in fact, the strongest piece. Now, having successfully done that game, and having started a couple of other games, a fantasy game and an ancients game, using the same kinds of principles, and all of this becoming what I call the Diceless Battles series, I decided that I wanted to do something that retained the hidden identity and strengths of Stratego, but was not hierarchical. And that's where Crashing Suns grew from. So in Crashing Suns, each player has block pieces, and they're numbered from 1 to 7 or a plus for a leader. And you can have any number in a particular hex. The board is a hex board, but the 27 systems on the board are connected by jump lines so that you can move more quickly from one system to another than you can by moving through the hexes. You can move through the hexes, but it's a slow go. You can only move 4 pieces in a turn, or 4 pieces plus your leader if you reveal your leader. So there's a lot of room for maneuver, and a lot of different ways that you can maneuver. Combined with this, I changed the combat system. You don't have a hierarchical system, rather you tally up the strength of your forces, and if you have a leader, it adds 1 to the strength of each piece. Then whoever wins loses their weakest piece. Whoever loses their strongest piece and has to retreat. Or if they're the attacker, they have to go back where they came from. Now this introduces a element of tension that's quite almost surprising. You reveal your pieces one at a time. I do not, just as I don't in Pacific, Convoy, and so on, have people rely on memory. Once a piece is revealed, it stays revealed until it joins other pieces that are not revealed, and then you can stand them back up. But since there can be several pieces in a hex, you don't know which one is which anyway. You can try to remember what the numbers were. Often, the pieces stay face down because there's no piece anywhere nearby that's standing up. But it reduces the memory component because I don't believe that memory should be part of strategic games. Now, if you are making a game like Concentration, the old TV program, that's all about memory. But if you're making a game, a war game, then memory should not be part of it. Now, the objective in the game is to capture 7 of 11 particularly valuable planets, or to capture the enemy's home world. And the game starts with a setup so that you have a lot of flexibility in where you put things, and it's possible to vary where the valuable systems are and so on. There's a lot of variation possible. What the game results in is something that is diceless. In this case, I call it Diceless Wars, because this is on a big scale. It's a whole star cluster. And maneuver is very important. It's not unusual for a player who is materially behind to win the game. But often the games are quite tense because one side will take 7 of the 11 objectives, but then the other side has a turn to reverse that, and often they can. You can get odd situations where one side has taken 7 of the 11 objectives, but the other side has taken their home planet, so the game continues. The game can also be played by partners, so you have 4 players rather than 2 players, and that works very, very well. And it enables people who would not normally play 1 against 1 to play the game. I won't take credit for this, I learned it from Academy Games, but it certainly works well in broadening the number of people who are willing to play the game. It's, I guess, a case where your partners, you're not putting your ego on the line the way you would otherwise. So it's a game of maneuver, and of course, in real warfare, the best generals are ones who win by maneuver more than by slaughter. Some games can last as short as 15 minutes if somebody makes a mistake, a big mistake. Other games can last over an hour. But it's not a very long game, because I don't feel that a 2-player game, which essentially this is 2 sides, needs to last more than, say, 90 minutes. My general philosophy is that you want to keep games simple and let people focus on the strategy rather than on the mechanics. And that's what I try to do in all my games, certainly in this one. Now, I think I've ended up with a system as good in its way as the Britannia system. And of course, my Britannia system has been used many times by other people to make games, and I have too, but those games haven't been published yet. But Britannia is a multiplayer system. It's for 4 players, or sometimes 3 or 5, whereas it's always 2-sided in this Diceless Wars system. Now, for 2 years after I devised this game, I just couldn't apply the system to other situations. The reason I made a space war game first is it seemed perfect for the situation, and especially the case of a rebellion where forces can be scattered all over the board. But I finally figured out how to do it. And so now I have a World War II East Front game that's in testing, a game called Mandate of Heaven, which is Chinese rebels after the fall of a Chinese dynasty. I have one that's an air-sea game in the Mediterranean Sea in World War II, and there are others that I have not tested yet, but are quite possible, because I think this is such a good system, and the testing results have been so good that I believe it's possible to make quite a few games from this system. In effect, in this system, of course, I have replaced the usual element of uncertainty in a game, or in a war game, which is dice. Instead, I've used the blocks. There are no dice in any way, shape, or form in the game. And that's true of all these games, no dice. But there's a lot of uncertainty that you can control up to a certain point, because you don't know what the enemy forces are until you reveal them in some way. Now, the title of the game, I had no title as I developed the game, and I finally stole a title from a game that's 35 years old that was really good but has not been published, and is perhaps more suitable to be a video game than a tabletop game these days. But Crashing Suns, I think, is a great title, and although I have to admit that I didn't originate it, I whipped it from somewhere else. Now, there was an entire element of technology in this game when I originally designed it. There were technology cards, and technology did various things. The first time it was played by the people that used the technology, but it rapidly became obvious that the technology wasn't necessary to the game. And so when it came time to publish, the technology had not been tested much, and it's still there. And if the game is successful, then we'll take the technology and try that out and issue that as an expansion. The other games have not been like that. I haven't had a need for an expansion, additional complication that might be possible to remove. It was only in the original Space War game. So I think this is one of my best games, and of course the designers are not the best people to ask these things, but that's my opinion, and it seems to be the opinion of a lot of the testers. They really like it, and I hope that you'll try it out. Thanks for listening.